And welcome back to the big show, everybody. Excited about our next guest. And I know I always say that, but Charles Arbuckle and I go way back when we were doing college football on ESPN together. And Buck was a great player and still is to this day one of the best analysts in the football realm, whether it's pro football or college football. And he stays busy and he joins us now. Buck, first off, good to see you, my friend. How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you? It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. And Buck, before you came on, I was thinking back, and it was a few years ago when you and I were doing games. Listen, we did NC State when Phillip Rivers was a quarterback, Russell Wilson was a quarterback, Megatron was at Georgia Tech, and they never threw a pass to him, Calvin Johnson. Dabo, we did the game. He was the interim coach.
Yeah.
He took over for Tommy when Clemson played Boston College. The rest is history there. We did an FSU game where we sat in the office with Coach Bowden, Bobby. Vernon Davis was a tight end at Maryland. When James Franklin, we sat in his office and he was the OC. Ralph Friesian was the head coach. I mean, we didn't realize it at the time, Buck, but we did a lot of kind of, it was 3:30 Eastern opposite the SEC game on CBS, so I don't know how many people saw it, but we did some pretty important games.
Well, it was interesting, too, because it was the advent of ESPNU.
Yes.
And I think, everybody would try to figure out, well, what's ESPNU? They had the really cool commercials back then. And we got to do a lot of things. Our producer, Todd Koulis, had us on top of what was it? The Carrier Dome, which is changed names, but we were on top doing the open. We did some crazy fun stuff. But I tell people all the time, I can remember Chan Gailey specifically in his office saying, Calvin Johnson is the best guy I've been around that works harder than anybody. And we said, Coach, you had Michael Irvin. He said, Mike was a great worker, but he said, this guy could be just as good as Mike. He kind of backed down a little bit, but he did say, this kid could be just as good as Michael Irvin because I think he had more athletic ability, 6'5" or 6, whatever he was, ran a 4.3, and just could and worked his butt off. And whenever they would throw to him, he had to make spectacular catches because his quarterback was more of an option guy. He was a good kid, but just wasn't a great thrower. So, it's funny remembering those. We had Russell Wilson where we sat down with him multiple times and talked ball. And then we would talk to Dana Bible, who was a legendary offensive coordinator who was under Sid Gilman. So, we had a chance to do some really cool things. And when I see some of the stuff that we did, or even when I was working the MAC games where we had all those great quarterbacks, I tell people, and they don't remember because I think we didn't have social media like they do now. But the things that we did have, we saw some great players early in their careers getting ready to make a name for themselves.
You're a big guy, and you were a great tight end at UCLA. We're going to get into that. But I remember Calvin Johnson when we saw him with maybe no shirt on in the field, before the game running around, and I was like, oh my goodness.
When I shook his hand, DB, I was like, I got some big hands. And I said, this cat right here, that might be 5X glove, 4X glove, because you could see why he could catch the ball so well. It was
Yeah, we had no idea that was the future Hall of Famer. We knew he had possibilities, but it's funny how they go to the next level. Hey, before we get back to football, I got to ask you this because you're a UCLA guy. Buck grew up in Houston, was a phenomenal high school player, went out to UCLA, and I think Terry Donahue took him around where all the pretty ladies were, and he wound up at UCLA. But anyway, what about Bill Walton? The big redhead passes away, and I know he was before you got to UCLA, but I know your paths crossed.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't know Bill well. I didn't know Kareem well, but you would see them at games. I would go to, we all went to the basketball games, and they were staples around the university. You'd see him. Kareem, even though he seems aloof, when you got to talk to him or spend time with him, it was cool because he has a great sense of humor, but he's just a quiet guy. That's just his nature. But Bill, he was like the Pied Piper. He'd come on campus, and just what you saw from Bill Walton is what you saw on TV and what you see about him, always like that. And I think I was listening to all the stories about what he did that I didn't even know, and his love and affection for John Wooden, who he enjoyed, but Wooden said, hey, he challenged me. I had to work with this kid. But it was a great understanding of how Wooden was able to touch different people from the, Sidney Wicks to Walt. I mean, just so many different personalities that he had, just all over the years. But Bill Walton being one of probably his most eccentric, but also the one that really put himself on the map. And I think the story that Mike Green told, you can find it on any of your social media platforms, really spoke to what Bill was like. Mike Green's dad was really sick. He couldn't travel much, wanted to go to the Midway down in San Diego. And I'm just relay part of the story, but Mike said Bill told him he cannot stay at a hotel. You got to stay at my house. So he stayed in the Bob Dylan room. He said Bill was with him the whole time. Took him, went on the ship. And you've been on the Midway of these ships. Bill is 6'11", 7 feet. So he's kind of getting through there, and he already has bad feet and back, but he spent all that time with Mike's dad. And he said Mike's dad remembered that. He didn't live much longer after that, but that was the one thing he remembered. And he said whenever he would be in a room with all the great players and his mom would come, she didn't want to see anybody else. She wanted to go see Bill Walton. So those are the kind of things, he was a kind of guy that people gravitated towards. And I think he could just make people unarmed. I mean, if you can hang with Kareem and Kareem calls you a friend, because he's, the captain is just, he's one of those guys that's just, we see him on campus, but, to have that relationship with him, to hear Larry Bird, the best, one of the best ish talkers in the game, say that was my idol. When I saw him growing up, I wanted to be like Bill. And I don't think people realize, DB, how good Bill was as a college player, let alone we saw him in Portland before all the foot injuries. 21 of 22 in that one championship game.
Yes.
And his ability to run the floor and do the different things. I mean, he just left a great legacy. And it's good when you go to a school like UCLA and you have guys that have come like Arthur Ashe, Jackie Robinson, and now you can add Bill Walton to those guys along with Kareem. But it's really cool to know that you walked the same halls, took some of the same classes, and had some of the same experiences. And I think we're all better for having Bill Walton in this world.
Yeah, well said. And if you ever go to UCLA and go to the Champions Room, where all the championship trophies, I mean, it's one of the most unique things. And there are a lot of sports, I mean, men's volleyball and all sorts of stuff.
Water polo,
Water polo, right. But it's just, it is amazing. And that takes me back now to UCLA, because when you were there, the great Terry Donahue was the head coach. There's a statue now, which is, I think, apropos for the all-time winningest coach at UCLA. Homer Smith was your offensive coordinator, and I got to know Coach Smith when he came to Alabama and later made his home in Tuscaloosa, and he was a very unique guy. And you caught passes from Troy Aikman. I mean, good gracious, Buck. You were at UCLA during really the golden era, weren't you?
Bill, I mean, Doug, it's interesting you bring up Troy, just because, thinking about UCLA at the time, all the transfer stuff now, UCLA wasn't a transfer school. I mean, they would get guys in and some guys would leave, but it wasn't like we have now. And Troy had just gone through his first year at Oklahoma, broke his leg against Miami, and then, didn't have a home. Jamel Holloway took over the starting position, and they were going to run the option. So our guy, who's our Jim Donnan was the offensive coordinator. He called Terry Donahue and said, "Hey, look, man, I got a really good kid for you whose dad lives in West Covina, so he wants to come back out your way. He wants to come to California and be a Bruin." And Coach Donahue, typical Coach Donahue. We don't know. And so they see Troy. They finally get him to transfer in. And then Donnan says he sees him at the coaches convention the next year and says, "Hey, how'd that Troy Aikman deal work out for you?" but we didn't have YouTube. We didn't know. But when we saw him on campus throwing, because he was on the intramural field for the first year working with Rick Neuheisel. So they were going through all the throws. DB, he could make every freaking throw. I mean, every throw. So Reggie Moore, my college roommate, and we were both from Houston, we saw him one day, and I said, "Zeke." That was his nickname because his dad was Zeke Moore, played 12 years in the league. And we were like, "Zeke, that's our quarterback." I was like, "Oh, my God, this is going to be fun." And then when we finally got him on the field, man, our defensive backs were so accustomed to, and our quarterbacks were good. But DB, it was a different level. I mean, he could make every throw. He could just put the ball wherever you needed. And it was so great playing with him because most quarterbacks that I've been with, they all have egos. And Troy had an ego too, but his was different. It was quite, if you didn't work as hard as him, was the only time I'd ever see him upset. If you worked hard and he made a mistake, my bad, bub, I got you. Okay, let's go. Wow. I mean, he was always ready to go. And when I see him or saw him get upset on the Cowboys sideline, it wasn't because because he wanted to show guys up. He just knows what your best looks like, and he was demanding that every single time. That's why, to this day, that's my guy. Ake is, my son turned 30 last year. He sent him a note. I mean, he's just always been one of those guys that you can call on and talk to and just be around. And then to have Coach Donahue's statue, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, Coach and I didn't always get along when I was in school because I was a young 17-year-old, thought I knew everything, wanted to fight everybody. And, he taught me what it was like to understand the game of football, the business of football, but also how to manage people. I think I still use some of the things now that he would say, things aren't as good as they seem and things aren't as bad as they seem. I hate it when he said that. But now, DB, as you get older, you can appreciate what he was saying to you in those lessons that he taught you. And then the great Homer Smith, man. Homer was probably one of the smartest guys I've ever been around, but not the smartest guy in the room. He didn't come in making you think that way, but the simple things that he would say or the things that he would do, he could talk trash to you too, and it was funny. But when you did something good, I can just remember Homer. Ooh, Arbuckle, so good, so fine. Look at you running that corner route. Ooh, he loved to see what he drew on the board come to life on the field. And I think it was great to be at UCLA at that time with some great players, great coaches, just great people.
And now you're a member of the Big Ten, Buck. Oh, my goodness.
DB, I can't figure that out. All the years I would watch the Rose Bowl and I'd see all the big burly teams. They would have one guy like Anthony Carter. They'd have one great wide receiver. Now we're in that conference. It's really strange. But I will say this. I think the one thing that I like is that Deshaun Foster has done a really nice job of making people excited about ball again. They're going to recruit nationally, which they hadn't done. Chip, for as good an offensive coordinator he was didn't recruit. He didn't like to recruit. And I think we're seeing a difference now with UCLA. It's going to take them some time. But I think from a skill possession, they're going to get kids that want to play from the Midwest, but they're also going to start competing now against kids on the West Coast. And I think that's what they're going to have to do to get into the Big Ten.
Wow. It's funny you mentioned Anthony Carter, and I obviously didn't plan on talking about AC, but in South Florida where I grew up, and our high school played Suncoast, and I'll never forget Coach Hopkins, our head coach. When we played Suncoast, we weren't going to punt to him. We weren't going to kick off to him. Whatever you do. Number one was back there. He will not touch the ball. On offense, it was hard to stop him. But he was incredible. And amazing that he wound up at Michigan. All right, let me ask you this. August 24th, you're about to get busy. The season's starting really early. You got Georgia Tech, FSU, and Dublin, Ireland. And right now, FSU a 12.5-point favorite. What about starting August 24th? Is that too early, Buck? Playing in Ireland, that's they've done it before. But what do you think?
Doug, I think the one thing we just need to get away from these conference championship games. I think I love that they're making money, but I think it adds an extra layer, especially now that we're going to 12 teams in the playoffs, and we're going to probably expand that at some point. It already seems like they want to get to 16 or 20 or whatever. Yeah. But if you have that many games, the conference championship to me becomes, and I know the SEC loves it because of what it does. All the conferences have it, but it adds an extra game, and it also gives you the time where the SEC has gotten smart and said in November, the third week or so, we're going to play XYZ school of technology, right? I like to see when they're playing their best games, but I also think there's too many games. I'm not going to ever turn it down because that gives us a chance to work. But I also think at some point that they're paying the money that they are. I don't think the inventory people continue to watch. I mean, every single weekend we can see 20, 30 games in a weekend, if not more. So I don't think it's going to go the other way, especially with NIL and now the advent of schools saying we will be able to pay players in a certain form and format. So I don't know if that's going to change. We may be even in earlier August next year as this changes over the course of time.
Buck, back when you played, obviously NIL was not around, even though I think, obviously college athletes were paid in some capacity under the table or whatever. But I mean, I can't imagine how much money you or Troy would have made, moving the clock forward, or if you're in a time machine or whatever. But are we in a dangerous place, Buck? NIL, now that, this lawsuit was settled and they're trying to disperse the money in some capacity. I mean, maybe not this year, maybe not in 5 years, but 10 years down the road, is the college game going to suffer from all that we're seeing right now? Because basically these young people, and we're talking football mainly here, but these young people are professional athletes now.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it'll suffer in the way we look at it, right? But will it suffer? I don't know, because you still have an affinity for your school, right? You still love your university. So I think that will be the part. I think the one thing that we do need is to get away from the whole idea that there's 131 or 32 Division I schools. There's 60 or 70 that need to be standalone, and those should be the ones that are, that is whatever they call it, the autonomous 70 or whatever. They need to be alone, and they need to have a commissioner that runs it. I mean, Greg Sankey would be the best for something like that because he's done the best job and understood. And then Tony Petitti is also involved in that, but they do need a commissioner of college football to help regulate, because the NCAA is not going to do anything. They can't. The courts have said that. The genie's out of the bottle. So how do we figure out how to be forward thinking? Because what I think right now, Doug, is everything we see is reactive instead of proactive. And if they can get to a proactive manner, which we haven't seen in probably 5 or 10 years, that could help the game. If not, we're going to just continue to see it evolve, and players will become unionized. They will have associations. That's going to happen. It has to, when you're starting to pay guys, 20, 30, 40,000 or not more a year.
Well, I mean, some of these quarterbacks, some of the star players now are getting upwards close to $2 million a season, Buck. I mean,
some guys don't, like, you're right. Some guys say, well, I'm not going to go to the league and make 500,000. I'll stay in college and make 2 million an extra year. I don't, if that was my kid, I'd be like, you're smart. You're making the right move. And so there has to be some changes, especially when you have a freshman that comes in who hasn't played and he's already $1 million, $2 million guy. I couldn't have imagined going to UCLA at 17 years old and competing against Ken Norton, Carnell Lake, Eric Smith, who hurt his back, but he probably would have been a great player too. All of James Washington, all the guys that I played against that got me ready to play at the next level, and saying I go in at $500,000 and they were making zero. They would have. I mean, I was already in a dogfight, but imagine those kind of things and how the locker room dynamics change when you have a young guy that's a highly recruited guy, and even if he can play, I was fortunate enough to play my first year because I showed that I could. But think about sometimes how the rough patches of guys that struggle some because they're not ready for it, and they're already making $2 million. That's a tough place to be for the player, but also for the players that are playing against them, because they're saying, "Look, you're going to make that money. Let's see what you have. Let's see what you're made of."
Yeah, and you're bringing up a great point, and it's a point where the haves and the have-nots, right? And so you're talking about the major programs, the Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Texas, et cetera, right? And so for every longtime season ticket holder in these skyboxes or whatever, they're now buying in essence, like paying a monthly stipend, which goes into this NIL program, right? And some of these people, because of where they are and their tickets and how long they've had them, they're paying upwards of $10,000 a month to this NIL program. And these are 10, 20, 30,000 people, right? Yeah. So these schools are building up such a war chest. The smaller schools won't be able to compete. So you're right. Eventually, it's going to break away to what, 70, 80 schools playing on the football platform?
It has to. My only concern with all of this is that no matter, how much money you make, I think the education aspect gets throttled because there's a lot of guys that aren't going to make it to the pros. And I do think, what's the value of your education and getting it? Making sure, because right now we got a lot of guys going into the transfer portal and then you never hear from them again.
Right.
Then do they go to another school to finish their degree? Probably not. That's my concern for a lot of these young men who have a chance to at least get your educational equity. Everybody wants financial equity. We all do. But I think the education that you can get almost free and then add it where you can make some money in college football puts you in a position where you're in a much better space where you can have conversations. I've been able to enter rooms because I have my degree. Plus I played at a university that was highly prestigious, and I have people that I can call if I need. That's my concern for a lot of these guys that we don't hear about. We always hear about the ones that end up making it, but there's a lot that gets stuck in that transfer portal. And that's the bad part for me. We got to figure out a way to say, okay, how do we get these guys, if they really want to finish ball, they want to play, but they also need that education in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know if we have an answer for those guys either.
Not yet. not yet. All right. Hey, before we let you go, let's see here. Winning the national championship, Georgia's plus 350. So if you bet 100, you get 350. Ohio State plus 425. Alabama, I thought was a good pick, Buck. Plus 1,400 for the Crimson Tide to win the national championship. Why not, right?
Yeah. I guess, the thing is, everybody's wondering if Kalen DeBoer is going to be able to come in and not have any Mike Price moments, right? And I think the thing is, at Bama job, I don't know if you want to go after Nick Saban, just kind of like John Wooden. Even if you have success, or Dean Smith, or any great coach, Coach K, the biggest thing for Kalen DeBoer is how quickly can he get those Alabama faithful on his side. I'll say this, having competed against him in the Pac-12, be patient, folks, because I wanted Kalen DeBoer for our job if Deshaun had not gotten it.
Wow.
Now that he didn't get it, because everybody you talk to says what a great coach he is. The players play hard for him. He's a player's coach, but he's also a demanding guy because he played at a smaller school. I can't remember, D2, D3.
Right.
But he's been such a really good recruiter in getting people to play hard. That Washington team, was pretty talented, but there was no way that they were going to end up beating that Michigan team. I saw Michigan beat Alabama in the Rose Bowl, and as good as Washington was, they're up front. They just didn't have the guys that Michigan had on both sides of the line of scrimmage. But I think even in that game, Kalen DeBoer was able to get those guys like, hey, we got to continue to fight. And I think that's the one thing you're going to see. You're not going to lose that with Alabama. They're going to have guys that already are dudes. How do you keep all those guys highly motivated and competitive? That's what Nick was able to do. If he ran people off, which is going to happen, he was still able to get the best guys to compete against each other. So 35, 40 guys every year that you're facing in your 2 deep or on your practice field are going to be playing in the league. And that's the thing I think the Bama fans want to see. And that's what Hugh Freeze is probably trying to say, okay, now we have a chance at Auburn to take that next step. So I'll be interested to see how Bama plays. I think there'll be a drop-off, which it always is when a new coach comes in. But how's he able to maintain and get his brand of ball and those folks excited? The Bama faithful, man, it ain't easy. You know that.
Well, and Buck, think about this now. This coming season at Wisconsin, at Oklahoma, at LSU, at Tennessee, at Ole Miss. Those are 5 road games. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I think that's something that he's probably already saying, look, we got to figure out how to keep our guys focused and not look too, because they got some road games that are not going to be easy. And usually, in the past, Bama's played those neutral site games, right?
Right.
I love it because I want to see those home and homes where you get a chance to see a Bama go on the road and then also have a team come to them that you don't see them often play. I mean, you've been down in that area for so long.
Yeah.
It's gonna be an exciting year. This is gonna be an exciting year of football.
All right. And August 31st, I mentioned this game because we're Dabo guys, right? And to think where we were on that Boston College day, he takes over. They win that game, right? And of course, now he's had a phenomenal run, even though there's been a little bit of a fall off the last couple of seasons. August 31st against Georgia, the Bulldogs 12.5-point favorite. Clemson, I think this is a big game, even though it's the first game. I think it's kind of a big game for Clemson.
I think so, too. It's funny. Every time I see Dabo at ACC Media or wherever I run into him, you guys didn't believe. I said, Coach, stop that. Doug and I were giving you all kind of love because you had us believe. You had us ready to suit up.
Right.
We put the helmets on. We were ready to go play that day. The big thing with Dabo, I think, is they're going to have to enter into the transfer portal. They're going to have to figure out a way to do that. As good as they are of building people from inside, you can still find guys that fit your culture from the outside. And I think if this Georgia game is close, it gives them a chance to say, see, we don't need to do that. But if they get throttled or it's not close, they're thinking they're going to be better. This Georgia team is going to be good. I don't care who. I mean, I look at their tight end crew. They lost Brock Bowers, and then they upgraded.
Yeah.
So I just think this is going to be a good game to tell us, do they enter the transfer portal or do they continue to stay inclusive of only Clemson homegrown guys? And I'm really interested to see that because Georgia's done a nice job of going in plucking guys that they need. Kirby has done that. All the other big programs have. At some point, they're going to have to do that. And this game might be the deciding factor, in my opinion, on what they need to do moving forward.
Yeah, and Carson Beck, the big quarterback, who very well could be the number one pick coming out after next season, this coming season, and he took a picture of that new Maserati or something that he bought. It's good to be the Georgia quarterback, Buck, you know?
Oh,
wow.
Man. Whether you're Stetson Bennett, whether you're him, or even if you transfer and you go to another school like Justin Fields. I have a real appreciation for Georgia because as hard as it's been for them to get to the mountaintop, think about all the Alabama stuff. Kirby has done a nice job of keeping who he is. They've had some issues. Anytime you have good programs, you're going to have kids that start doing some things. But one thing they've done, DB, they have stayed competitive and they have played really hard and they have a DNA. I mean, now that you see their defense, you see what those guys do. Philadelphia Eagles just said, look, let's just go draft all these guys from Georgia every year.
Right.
Offensively, they run the ball and they got guys that can go get it. Ladd McConkey, I think he's a perfect fit for Jim Harbaugh and with the Chargers. I think Brock Bowers is going to be a generational player at the next level, just because of what I could see watching film of him, but what he can do every day. They have guys now that are coming through there that are going to be just like what we saw when we were calling games. And that's what I like about Georgia and this footprint, hearing about them all the time when they recruit this area.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Buck, we've taken up a lot of your time, but I do appreciate it. It's great to catch up.
Me too.
Have you played any golf, or is that like just not happening right now?
I just got my clubs out, and they are not working right. I'm working well, but the clubs are not doing what they need to do, DB. So I'm going to really lean in on that in June and July before the season starts. So I'm going to get better. I might throw these clubs away and get a new set because they're letting me down.
You're just like the PGA guys. You got to blame it on something. Blame it on the clubs.
I hear you, man.
It's not the pilot, right? It's the airplane you're flying.
It's the club.
Hey, Buck, great to see you, my friend. And we'll talk to you hopefully before football, but enjoy the summer.
All right. Thanks, DB.